Hey everyone, welcome back to Strange New Worlds, a science and Star Trek podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wong. As evinced by the very existence of this podcast, I pride myself on being not just a scientist, but also a science communicator. And my most important piece of science communication to date is about to be published. On February 10, 2026, my first popular science book hits bookshelves. Its title is Time's Second Arrow: Evolution, Order, and a New Law of Nature. It's all about some of the research I've been engaged in over the past few years, wrestling with the universe's ability to create astonishing complexity, stars, planets, life, including you and me. It's a short, accessible book meant to share the joy of scientific discovery with general audiences. And I co-wrote this book with today's guest, Bob Hazen, my colleague at Carnegie Science's Earth and Planets Laboratory. Let me tell you a little bit about Bob. He is a force of nature. Bob is one of the world's foremost mineralogists and astrobiologists. He's published hundreds of influential papers and over a dozen books. You'd think that someone like that, now in his late 70s, would be sitting on a beach somewhere, resting on his hard-earned laurels. But not Bob. He works harder than anyone I have ever seen, with a fervor for science that is simply unparalleled. I feel so lucky to have Bob as a colleague, a mentor, and a friend. Honestly, I have to pinch myself every single day. Can it actually be true? I get to go into work and do science with Bob Hazen? And Bob Hazen comes to work and wants to talk about science with me? Are you kidding me? I live a charmed life. And so today, I'm sharing a very special conversation between myself and my book co-author, Bob Hazen. You'll immediately get a sense of how well he and I connect and how rich our conversations are when we realize that our sound check should just be the actual podcast. We got your voice and the sound levels,
this
right?
is a sound check.
Yep,
1, 2, 3,
yep.
4, 5. I'm sitting here with Mike.
Yeah. What'd you have for breakfast this morning?
Oh, I have Margie makes these great quiches. They can take onions and sausage, and it's just I have a little triangular slice, grapefruit juice, and a cup of tea.
Oh my goodness!
And we read news to each other. We have our laptops out, and I usually read the advice columns. Ask Carolyn and ask Sahaj and ask Eric. These are advice, and we read the question from the reader, and then we discuss it, and then we listen. We read the answer to each other. So it's like a way of saying, well, what do you think about this social or personal interaction? Should he or shouldn't he? Kind of thing. And it's just a way of kind of connecting in the morning, and I always love her opinions, so I just want to sit down and listen to what she has to say, and she always reacts in a very kind of animated and often surprising way. So this is a great, just listening to your partner, and look, I mean, the problem is we've only been married 57 years. So
Just
we're still getting to know each other, but we think it might work out.
I really love that. Yet another thing that I've been inspired to do because of you. I love this idea. Still, you're acknowledging that you don't know everything about your partner, and that even after 57 years, you have still, every morning you can learn something new from them.
We are an evolving system.
Yes.
And not only that, the environment changes. And when the environment changes, even if you evolve to a certain point, it's never going to be stasis. Every day is going to be a new relationship,
right,
building on what you had before.
Yeah.
And so this ratcheting up of experience turns out to be an incredibly common theme in our lives. And Mike, you're in my work.
Yeah. Wow. This is actually really great material. Maybe we should just keep going.
Keep going.
Sure.
And
Amazing. So Bob. Well, for the audience, I am sitting here today with one of my closest collaborators, Bob Hazen, whom I look up to so much and I value as a really dear friend. I feel like Bob is the kind of person and the kind of scientist that I want to be like when I grow up, when I get to your age. And so we're here today to discuss a book that is coming out. It'll appear in bookstores February 10th, 2026. Its title is Time's Second Arrow, Evolution, Order, and a New Law of Nature. And just today, the day that we're recording this podcast, a big box of books arrived in your office. You opened it up. What did it feel like, Bob, to open up that package of books?
I've written other books, so I've had this experience before, but the thrill for me was getting to sit next to you while I open it, because even as you said nice things about me, for your listeners, Mike Wong is a truly extraordinary young scientist. Extraordinary because he's a world's expert in his own field of planetary science, but one of the incredibly rare people who thinks so broadly beyond his own specialty. And as I've written in many letters of recommendation, because this is what you do when you have a younger colleague, I've said that of the thousands and thousands of students I've interacted with over the years, Mike's the one person I wish I had been like him when I was his age. It took me decades to get to the point where I could think outside of my own narrow domain and understand the connectivity of everything. And the book, Time's Second Arrow, what it does is it sort of takes those themes and sets them down in writing in a startling and audacious way. When we met, we didn't know we were going to be proposing a new law of nature, but that's exactly what we've done. And I think it's important work. It's fascinating work for anybody who's interested in just the way the universe works. Mm-hmm. It adds something.
And speaking of adding something, Bob, you add so much to my life. I mean, I feel like every single day I come into work and I get to learn something new from you, whether that's the intricacies of mineralogy, strategies for searching for life in the universe, the history of science, or just how to better communicate science. And I feel like I had one of those moments yesterday. We were on somebody else's podcast as guests, and Bob came in with this amazing intro by posing a question to the audience.
Yeah.
I just want to steal that from my audience.
Yeah. Because I think our book, I think if you think about it, what is our book saying? There's sort of these 5 big insights that we have proposed in this kind of audacious book. And the first one has to do with an everyday phenomenon. And so I want your listeners just to make a mental image of 5 things: a mineral, a rainforest, a city, a favorite piece of music, and AI, artificial intelligence. And think about what do those 5 things have in common? And okay, I'm going to help you out. I'll tell you. The answer is they're all complex, evolving systems. They're all systems that in some way over time become more patterned, become more interesting, become more diverse. They do new things, whether it's the world of music, where you started with Gregorian chant and then you went through centuries and centuries development, and now we have the richness of musical genres we have today, or whether it's cities that start as a few humble dwellings and expand outward, a rainforest, you can imagine this, but even artificial intelligence, which started out as just some very simple computer programs, and now look how fast artificial intelligence is evolving, changing, increasing its ability to do things that it couldn't do a year or even a month ago.
Right.
So there's something about these systems that's in common. They're all evolving. Now, when you talk about evolution, most people think of Darwin. Mm-hmm. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. But what we're arguing in our book is that Darwin's a supremely important and true special case of a much more general phenomenon. It's the special case that applies to living things where you have genetic information transferred from one generation to the next with mutations, and then those mutations can lead to variations that can be selected for, and that's how evolution occurs. But they're all evolving systems. Minerals evolve too. They also start very, very simply, and the system becomes more patterned, more diverse, more complex, building on itself, getting ever more complex.
Right. And when we're saying that we are proposing a new law of nature, the reason why we're so audacious in saying this could be a universal law is because we see these conceptual commonalities across these very disparate systems. Yeah. From, as you said, a rainforest to artificial intelligence. And naturally, one might be inclined to say, no, that can't be because, the mineralogical world is a natural world, is part of the natural world, and artificial intelligence and music are part of the human world. There's a divide there, but we're really seeing conceptual equivalencies in three aspects of all of these systems.
That's right.
First, these systems are composed of many interacting components, right? You've got notes on music sheets, you have bits and strings of computer code making up AI, different species in the rainforest, different atoms that can arrange themselves in different ways and bonds within minerals.
Yeah, absolutely. So we think there's a commonality there. And when you see that commonality, then you start saying, well, what else do these have in common? And as you said, they're all made of smaller bits. Those bits can arrange themselves in vast numbers of different ways. And there seems to be a selection process going on, selecting for what we've called sort of in a colloquial way, function. You're selecting for those systems that do something better than the other configurations, which are then rejected.
And how do we incorporate the idea of information into this? Because information is, as we see it, a vital parameter in the natural world, but exactly how does it enter into this concept of selection for function?
There has long been in the natural sciences something called the arrow of time. And that arrow of time has been described as this something we sense every day, and that's the increase in disorder. You buy a new pair of shoes, they get scuffed. We see people get sick, they get injured, they get old, they die, they decay. I mean, this is just a drumbeat of our lives. You can't escape it. It's a bummer. That's the second law of thermodynamics, or the increase in entropy. And this idea then that there may be a second arrow of time.
So the first arrow of time comes from this increase of entropy, what in science we know as the second law of thermodynamics. It's confusing. The first arrow of time
is
second law. But it's, again, as Bob said, the inescapable fact that things tend to decay when left unattended, right? And we also see this in our daily lives whenever you scramble an egg for breakfast, right? You can't really unscramble that egg. Entropy
I got a hot cup of tea that's sitting here on a desk, and in an hour it'll be cold.
Right, and that is one inevitable drumbeat of time. What we're suggesting is, through our natural law, is that there is the second arrow in time that describes the increase of patterning, order, complexity, diversity in the universe that is not captured solely by the second law of thermodynamics, by this increase of entropy.
Yeah, and this is a little bit outrageous because there are a lot of very smart physicists out there who say, no, you only need one arrow of time, that the increase in entropy describes everything, and even evolution. And what they say is what evolution does is it gets you to higher and higher states of complexity or organization, which therefore disperse energy, increase entropy faster and faster. So they say that's a cause. We say, no, it's always a consequence. You're always going to increase entropy. No matter what you do, that's wrapped in. But it's not the cause of evolution. There's something else. And that cause is information, in a sense. Because systems go towards states that are more functional. Now, you're the one, Mike, that figured out there's these three different kinds of function. You should tell people about it because this is like your idea.
Yeah,
it's really cool.
We think that there are these three fundamental sources of selection. The first is just for persistence, static persistence, being exactly as you are for some time without decaying toward entropy. If you don't persist for a little bit, you don't get to play the game and continue to ratchet up in evolution. Now, once you have a bunch of statically persisting entities, they might be able to interact with one another, form relationships and connections amongst themselves that form what we call a dynamic system, one that is always intaking new resources, new bits of matter and energy, and exporting things as well, but whose activities then can persist through time. You can think of a hurricane maintaining itself, a star maintaining itself, a human being, a cell, a living thing, an ecosystem maintaining itself, importing low entropy fuel, exporting high entropy waste as it must to pay its debt to the second law of thermodynamics, but at the same time experiencing evolution toward more interesting forms. And this is where the third selection criterion, so we've covered static persistence, dynamic persistence, right. Now also novelty generation. Yeah. Because if you're a dynamic system figuring out new ways of being, you can invent new functions. We see this all the time in life. The ability to see, the ability to crawl, the ability to fly. Things that can generate novelty will find new ways of being and new ways of persisting. And we think that there's also a selection pressure to be creative.
Yeah. And so we have this common set of characteristics of every evolving system, but how do you measure it? How do you actually say this? And that's where the law comes in, because we are proposing a way to measure this. So imagine a system, let's take a really simple system. It only has 1 trillion different possible configurations. And you say you want that system to do something. You want it to hold a cup of tea, for example. And there's 1 trillion different ways you can arrange the atoms, but only a few of them are actually going to hold a cup of tea. And what we say, you can measure the function of that cup holding a cup of tea through something called functional information. Now, that's an idea that was introduced by Nobel Prize-winning scientist Jack Szostak in 2003. He introduced it specifically to talk about genetic material and how much information it could hold, but not just holding information, but holding information that does something. And so it's a fraction. It's based on a fraction. The fraction is the number of configurations that actually work, which is very small, versus the total number of possible configurations, most of which don't work. That's very large. So you put the tiny number over a big number, that's a very small fraction. And then technically, you take the negative log to the base 2 of that. It just turns it into a number of bits.
Yeah. And
so this is information in bits. You're familiar with bits. You pay for, your storage of information in gigabits. Well, these are bits. And it turns out that what we argue is that under selective pressure, if you keep generating new configurations, if you keep trying new things and you select for some function, you're going to ratchet up. You get to some level, hey, this works pretty well. And then you start modifying that. And then, here's something that works a little bit better. And here's something that works a little bit better. And as things work better, the fraction gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And if you remember that negative log to the base 2, that means the number of bits gets larger and larger and larger. So this is called the law of increasing functional information. It's an arrow of time that says this is how nature, the mechanism by which nature increases the complexity, increases the functionality of systems. It increases the way systems evolve. And that's true for minerals. It's true for rainforests. It's true for cities. It's true for music. It's true for AI. It's true for all different kinds of systems. 100 systems that you experience in your life every single day evolve. That is, the functional information of those systems increases as new configurations are generated and you select for things that work ever better. I guarantee you next year there's going to be a new piece of music that builds on what came before, but you're going to say, wow, that's like my favorite piece of music ever because it's something new building on what came before.
Right. There's so many applications of this concept of selection for function and the increase of functional information out there. In our initial paper from 2023, we really only touched upon the conceptual equivalencies between the nucleosynthesis of atoms and isotopes, mineral paragenesis, and the evolution of life. Just 3 broad systems. But now we're seeing this explosion of applications in the literature, thinking about evolution through our lens of selection for function in everything from soil ecology, which is very relevant for environmental concerns, to artificial intelligence, like you said. Right. AI is evolving very quickly, even to cancer studies and proposing new treatments for cancer that are inspired by this idea of understanding a tumor's progression through ratcheting up in functionality.
Yeah, this crazy idea that a tumor somehow becomes, as an entity, sort of semi-autonomous. It becomes isolated from your body, and then it starts doing its own thing, and now your body becomes the environment in which that tumor is evolving through a law of increasing functional information and ratcheting up from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 and so forth. I mean, I didn't have the vaguest dream that we'd ever touch on something like that, but since evolution is a universal thing, it means that if you have a law of evolution that is even remotely touching on kind of the right concepts, and that may be what we're doing here. We may not have the final answer. We probably don't have the final answer, but we're sort of touching on something that then has implications that go so far. Star Trek evolves.
Yeah, exactly. I was hoping that we could illustrate. Let's illustrate the law of increasing functional information by pretending that we're going to write a new Star Trek episode. So how would that work? We'd sit down.
Oh, Mike, it takes me back to my youth, because you see, I'm older than you are. So I was in a very fortunate position to be alive when the very first episodes of Star Trek came out back in 1966. It was the second half of 66. And that was my first semester of college.
Wow.
At MIT. And so, MIT was exhausting. We didn't have time for anything. But we went home for Christmas break, and I remember, we were ready for just taking some time off. And wouldn't you know it, the episode I remember from that period talked about just that. Yeah. It was called Shore Leave. It was like maybe the 14th, 15th episode. They aired on Thursday evenings. And the thing I remember so much about this was that it's the first time I ever saw color TV. Because color TV was introduced in the 50s, but almost nobody had them. It was like the equivalent of $10,000 or more for a color television.
Wow.
And color TVs were very rare until the early 70s. So in 1966, there weren't a lot of... But Guy Van Duzer. Now, some of your listeners may even know that name. Guy Van Duzer is a very famous guitarist. He was the guitarist in our band. We had a band called the Starfires, and Dave Justice on drums, and I was on trumpet, and we gigged all around the New York City area. But Guy became very famous. He was on Prairie Home Companion. He teaches at Berkeley School. He had the first color TV of anybody I knew. This was in Ridgewood, New Jersey. And I like going over there. His sister Claudia was really cute too. So it was like there was. But we went up, and there was this during Christmas break. We were all just exhausted again, and there was this episode called Shore Leave, which was hilarious. I think they must have planned it that way because Kirk and the crew were exhausted. They had been on missions for a long time, and so they were looking for a place to get some R&R. Mm-hmm. And they found this habitable planet, and it seemed to be like there weren't any dangers down there. And they went down there, and then they started hallucinating. Bones sees a white rabbit, and Zulu, and there's a knight that comes in there and impales Bones, and Kirk finds a nemesis from his Starfleet days, mm-hmm. and all these things happen to people, and nobody can understand it. And by the end of the episode, they realized this great story that this was actually a vacation planet. It was a planet that was designed for people to go and rest, and you'd imagine things you want to imagine. And so they learned how to use it. And then this crew had a really nice shore leave, I'm sure. But we were all on shore leave, too, at the time. And so watching that with my incredibly good friends in the band and watching on my first color TV, that was a huge memory. But think how primitive that was. I mean, there was, I think it was all puppetry. I don't think there was any special effect. There was no CGI. This was 1966 after all. Mm-hmm. And then think how Star Trek episodes evolved over the years. It's jaw-dropping.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
What do you remember? What's the earliest episode you remember?
It was an episode of The Next Generation called Masks. I was 4 or 5 at the time. My dad was a fan of the original series, and he was watching The Next Generation, and I remember just walking into the room, sitting on the couch next to him, seeing this episode, and so this episode featured very heavily the android Data, and the amazing acting of Brent Spiner, and I was watching that episode and was so transfixed by this mechanical looking being experiencing this episode. Data had been inhabited by some kind of artificial intelligence that was taking over his brain, and it was acting very strangely. And I don't know what it was about that character, but it was just like, I want to see more of this. And I didn't even know what the premise of the thing was. I had to ask my dad later, so what is this show about? And he said, well, it's about exploring space.
Yeah, all right.
But I feel like, so Star Trek, the makeup's gotten better, the sets have gotten more intricate, the computer-generated graphics as well, the diversity of the cast has evolved.
Sure has.
And so, when we think about the evolution of Star Trek, and if we right now were to try to make a new episode, we would probably look back at what's come before. We would scribble down a few ideas, do some brainstorming. 90% of those might just end up in the trash, right?
Yeah.
And then we would go and we would partner with folks who could actually bring our ideas to life. Again, only a fraction of those ideas will get built into a set or go into a computer and be rendered. We will have lots of sketches, but it's all of these possibilities that are generated and then let go of, only a few of which survive to the final product.
There's also the ratcheting, the writing to me.
Yeah.
The writing just kept getting better. I mean, I just remember The Wrath of Khan and saying, this is it isn't the exact same language, but this is a Shakespearean story.
Right.
The story of a really brilliant leader who becomes so obsessed with revenge that brings himself and all the people around him down. Mm-hmm. And it was magnificent. It was incredible. But you see, it's built on what came before,
right? But
it adds something new, and then you can build on that, and then it becomes the standard. And the death of Spock, my gosh, I mean, that was so emotionally powerful.
Yes.
But it builds on what came before, but it adds something new. And this is how evolution happens. You keep trying new configurations, and you keep finding things that work and become sort of immortal in their genre. Mm-hmm. And Star Trek just did that over and over and over again.
Still going.
Yeah. Because one of the things that Star Trek, I felt, always made it rise above many other shows was it wasn't content just to give you an adventure or an action-packed thing, or there's an enemy, a bad guy, and you take the bad guy down, something like that. I mean, even in The Wrath of Khan, there were subtleties. There were ethical dilemmas. And it makes you wonder then, in an evolving system, if you're selecting for things that work, here you have to make a subjective kind of decision. What do you mean by work?
Yeah.
What do you mean by function? Mm-hmm. What do you mean by this configuration is better than that configuration? And when you start talking about words like that, better, work, you start thinking about meaning. And I think working on this, what we're calling a missing law of nature, brings us headfirst into the question of, is this a natural law that can address meaning, can address purpose? And many people who have heard our ideas have said that. I mean, we've had people who wrote us emails and say, oh, thank you for proving the existence of God.
Right.
Which is not at all what was on our minds here, but for some people, the idea that the universe does spontaneously through a mechanism which is easily understood by just a time-dependent process, go from simpler to more complex, go from less pattern to more pattern, from lower diversity to higher diversity systems. That seems like an arrow of increasing order that one could ascribe some kind of meaning or purpose to the universe. The universe does this spontaneously.
Right.
Well, that's a huge philosophical, theological question, which I don't think we felt prepared to answer ourselves. That's something everybody has to address coming to this. But it's intriguing if someone says to me, yeah, this is a law of purpose. I have a reaction to that. And it's wonderful that you're seeking this in the cosmos. And it's wonderful that you feel natural laws and somehow can give you that. But let me stretch this idea. Gravity. Gravity is a law of nature. Isaac Newton's idea that if you have any two masses, there'll be a force between them, and that force between them is what allows stars to form. It was what formed planets. It's what's formed the periodic table of the elements through the processes in stars. It's what seeds the universe with the elements of life. So life couldn't happen without gravity. Mm-hmm. But it would be a real stretch for me to say that the purpose of gravity is life.
Right.
Or the purpose of gravity is even stars and planets. Gravity, that's a mechanism. It's a description of a mechanism that is an operation in the cosmos. And in the exact same way, our law of increasing functional information is a description of a mechanism in the cosmos. It's how the universe works. And so if you're going to ascribe purpose to that, it's fine. You can say the Creator made the natural laws, and the Creator made the natural laws in such a way as to lead to us talking about the natural laws, and that gives meaning and purpose. And if you think that, then you better understand the laws of nature, because that's how the deity, that's how the Creator did it. Mm-hmm. At the same token, if you don't want anything to do with discussions of theology and whether there's a God and whether there's something that's a force greater than us that's guiding all of this, then, gosh, these laws of nature are all you got.
Right.
They are what's controlling your life, and you better understand science to do it. So believe in God, a creator, not believe in a creator, doesn't matter. You still need to understand the laws of nature, because you're going to have to live by those laws.
That's
and
right.
They tell us what's possible.
Right, exactly. I see science's project as essentially to understand change in the universe. How do things change? If I apply a force, how will that object's motion change? Those are the laws of motion. If I change something about a system's energy, those are the laws of thermodynamics. How do we see change in evolving systems, this increase in patterning order that we see all around us in our world, in our universe, that went from a very homogeneous soup of hydrogen and helium to stars, planets, galaxies, planets with life and art and music and Star Trek, right?
Yes,
So
right.
How do we understand that change? That's what our new law is trying to get at.
Absolutely.
Now, along these lines of meaning and purpose, I feel like they're just another way of describing the functions of these systems. So like, for instance, in Star Trek, maybe the purpose of a certain episode is to attract new viewers. I mean, it certainly worked on you and me. And so you can use those words to say, like, yes, that episode was built for the function of, and one of the functions might be, to be appealing to people who have never seen it before, or to keep people watching who have been with the series the entire time. But beyond that, I feel like these grand philosophical questions of purpose built into the underlying nature of the universe is not something that we're touching with this law, but we can speak about purpose as it is constrained to the function that has emerged within a system.
If you think about, what is the purpose, what is the function of a law of nature? Mm-hmm. And I think there's 4 aspects to that, which become really important. The first is just to describe something in nature. We've described a model of evolving systems that goes way beyond Darwin. We say that atoms and isotopes evolve in stars. We say that minerals evolve in planets. And then we talk about music evolving and AI evolving. So it's the whole gamut of complex systems in nature. So we've described that. The second thing is to explain. Mm-hmm. Why do they work the way they do? And so what we described is a kind of ratchet. Did you reach one state of organization which is primed? If you then modify that system a little bit to find, the solution works even better, and you ratchet that up. Star Trek ratchets up better. I mean, it has evolved. In fact, you could write a whole article, Mike, on the evolution of Star Trek and some of your ideas about funneling and state expansion, where you could introduce a new character, you could introduce a new technology, whether it's animation or certain kinds of CGI technologies, which allow you then to explore new possibility space that never existed before. So, describing and explaining. A third one is quantifying.
Right.
Now, quantifying means that you actually assign numbers. And here's one of the fundamental things we've tried to do. We're suggesting that information is a fundamental, quantifiable variable in the natural world, as important as mass, as charge, as energy. We just don't have the laws of information for nature yet, but we think they're just embedded there. And this is information, specifically the functional information, that is comparing a state that does something that helps it persist or construct novelty compared to all those states that don't. So that's quantifying. And finally, if you really have a law of nature that works and we understand it, we can quantify it, then you can start making predictions.
Yeah.
Now, to me, that's the undiscovered country. That's the great frontier. But these cancer researchers are suggesting there are entire new therapies for cancer that will come out of this. Now, that is a prediction. They're going to start proposing therapies. They're going to run clinical trials. They're going to see that. And if, miracle of miracles, if it actually leads to the helping of curing some kinds of cancer, then that will add weight to our ideas. It will never prove that we're right. And there's no way a scientist can ever prove that a theory is absolutely correct. There always are possibilities of modifications or changes, but it means that we're on the right track because we have described, explained, quantified, and predicted.
Yeah.
That's our goal.
Right.
So where do you think Star Trek's going? Predict. What's next?
Well,
3D holographic.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really fun to see. I was in Southern California for the holidays a few weeks ago, and I visited Disneyland, where they have this new Star Wars world, the rival franchise.
Sure.
And the rides there are very interactive. You're almost brought on a story where you're part of the rebels, or the resistance, as they call them these days, and you're captured by the evil empire, or the First Order. I wore my Star Trek uniform to the Star Wars ride that I could pretend that I had accidentally shifted universes, maybe went through a wormhole, the dimensions changed, and I was now being captured by the evil empire. And I feel like that kind of experience of putting yourself into the story is something new that Star Trek had at one time. I don't know if you know about the Las Vegas, it was called Star Trek The Experience, but it only lasted for, I think, a few years before it disappeared. I don't think it made any money. Again, selection for function. If you're not making money, then you're going to disappear. You're not going to persist. But I feel like the next leap for Star Trek will be to hopefully create experiences where fans can believe that they are entering the Star Trek universe, at least for some time.
So cool. That would really be great. Sign me up.
Yeah. One thing also, Bob, you talked about what distinguishes Star Trek from a lot of other franchises, shows, and media. I believe one distinguishing aspect of Star Trek is that it presents a hopeful and optimistic future for humanity, whereas many other shows these days are extremely dystopian and negative in their outlook. So this ties back to the missing law, because a reporter once asked us, is our law a law of hope? Yeah. In what way do you think, Bob, the law could be a law of hope? Is it a law of hope to you?
Well, that's so interesting, because what you say about Star Trek is absolutely true. It's a hopeful, but it's not a naive. It's not a naive show. It recognizes that there are dangers, that there's evil, there's hazards, there's things. What it says is that we can overcome them. So how do you overcome things? Well, you try new configurations. You recognize that different communities of people and maybe different communities of countries can come together and try new things. Some of them won't work. Some of them will be politically or economically impossible. But that we do also, we're humans. We can imagine configurations. This is one of the miracles of being humans and having consciousness. It's one of the things that makes Star Trek so wonderful, is because they imagine strange new worlds. They imagine new environments. They imagine what would happen if people from the future came back to the 20th century and interacted. I mean, this is a brilliant way of juxtaposing cultures and ideas and seeing the commonality in the human experience. And I feel very strongly that there are certain fundamental commonalities among us, but we need to keep exploring possibility space in order to select the best paths forward.
I feel like understanding the way that evolution operates grants us this agency to influence that process and determine our future through our imaginings of alternate paths, and then the selection of the ones that are the most promising, fruitful, prosperous, etc.
Yes.
And honestly, we talked at the very beginning about these commonalities, how the evolution of minerals and the evolution of life and the evolution of technology, music, AI have these underlying commonalities. But I think if there is something that separates the world of technology and art from the mineralogical and to some degree the biological world as well, it's that ability to imagine, the ability to
exactly.
and we talk about this in a paper that we're working on right now. So we're thinking about the different ways that evolving systems explore their function landscapes, and the ways that systems explore these landscapes. These landscapes are hilly, and they've got ravines, and they're defined by the functional information of different configurations. Well, a mineralogical system, a system of isotopes and atoms, they're exploring, and their exploration is confined by physical and chemical processes.
Yes.
But our exploration of art, of making Star Trek, of creating technology, is not just confined by those rigid physical chemical laws. We are able to explore this functional landscape through our imagination and make leaps that perhaps allows us to explore things in a fundamentally different way.
Yeah, this is how science evolves.
Yeah.
This is you and I sitting down at a table and just having conversations, having lunch, and just talking with our colleagues and our peers. And the wider we expand that group and the more different ideas that come in, the more new configurations of ideas. And then you select and you winnow and you funnel and you refine and you chip away. It's like this process of discovery is one of evolution by thinking about configurations. Yeah, it's actually true. Biological evolution is incredibly limited because you can only evolve by mutating what is just there, and the mutations can't be too radical or the organism will die. So it's very slow. It's little increment, step by step. But the human mind can imagine things that never existed before, and then you can develop them. And the fact is that AI and some of the related technologies, things like genetic algorithms, which is the way these days engineers design airplane wings or electronic circuits or microchips, that kind of thing. You can try millions of different configurations per second because you can calculate how they will behave, whether a wing will work or not, whether an electric circuit will work or not, because we have equations for those things. So yeah, it's astonishing. That's what human ingenuity and creativity has led to, that was unlike anything that came before.
Yeah.
We are evolving much, much faster.
And we can make connections between a conceptual abstract framework like the one we've been discussing for the past 40 minutes or so, and applications. And one of the most exciting applications that we're working on in tandem is building a tricorder, right, Bob?
Yeah, I love this. I love this idea. I mean, the idea is simply that nature is information rich. It has vast amounts of stored information, and we're developing technologies, fancy things called like Raman spectroscopy and mass spectroscopy and other ways of teasing out this information that's preserved even over millions or billions of years, for example, in rocks, in ancient rocks. And you could imagine a device you could hold in your hand that has some of these analytical techniques linked to AI, and you hold it up to a rock, you hold it up to a leaf, you hold it up to an alien, and it will tell you the properties of that organism. This is not really science fiction anymore. Now, the tricorder could do some pretty amazing things that we're not quite there technologically, but it's all based on information. And the more that we have sort of the AI technology to analyze the information and new analytical methods to get the information that we need, the more and more we're going to get close to this kind of technology. It's a handheld device that tells you about the world around you. Right. Truly extraordinary. But how prescient were the Star Trek writers originally to come up with these these devices.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm holding essentially what is, a touchscreen pad in my hands right now. And that was imagined long before it was ever a reality. And I feel like, our mission in the astrobiology realm is to develop the precursors to a tricorder. Probably is not going to fit in our hands anytime soon.
A watch you can talk into and communicate with other people.
Well, there you go. Now we have those. But hopefully the techniques and technologies that we're developing for astrobiology will fly one day on, say, a rover to Mars or an orbiter to one of Jupiter's moons and try to look for life there.
It's one of the most exciting outcomes of our missing law work, the idea that we predicted that the molecules of life are going to be fundamentally different from the molecules in an abiotic environment. By abiotic, we mean there's no life involved. It's just the kind of chemistry that occurs in deep space when you have an asteroid circling the sun for 4.5 billion years. The molecules are going to be different because life's molecules, each one is selected for exquisitely refined function. And therefore, the distribution of those molecules is just going to look different. And that's what we found in our recent paper. It just came out a month and a half ago, and it's astonishing. We can tease out life from rocks that are almost 4 billion years old. Gosh.
Right.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, exactly. And listeners, if you want a more in-depth discussion about this technique, see my podcast episode from November with Dr. Anirudh Prabhu, another member of our team.
Oh, yeah.
It's just so
Fantastic.
Brilliant. Bob, is there anything else that you think we should touch on before we leave today?
I think you should look at your life as an evolving system.
Ah, yes.
And I feel that, for those of you who can't see us, Mike's right at the beginning of his career. I'm right at the end of mine. And so there's a kind of poignant contrast between the two of us working on this fundamental problem. But I've seen through my life so much change, so much pain in some ways. So I'm keenly aware of time's first arrow. That's the increase in entropy, the inevitable, the drumbeat of decay and deterioration, of increase in disorder. And it's so easy for humans, for us as individuals, to succumb to that. You can say a mean word to a colleague that will sting that person for the rest of their lives. And we've all said that terrible thing, that thing that you can never unsay. It is beyond unsaying. But you can also make choices in your life, because there's a second arrow of time. And that second arrow of time is an arrow of increasing order, where we can consider many, many different opportunities. We can think in our mind, should I go this path or this other path? And you can imagine those futures, and you can choose the path that will increase the function, that will increase your ability. You can just choose to smile for someone. You can help the elderly. You can just make choices in your life that make life better for those around you. That is a choice. And it's a choice that isn't the second law of thermodynamics. It is not the increase in entropy. It's an increase in order. It's an increase in functional information. So you too can be part of this evolving universe. You can be part of the universe in which the functional information has been and will continue to increase through time.
You can follow the link in the show notes to find out more about time's second arrow, evolution, order, and a new law of nature. If you're listening to this before February 10, 2026, you can pre-order the book. That really helps it gain traction on the charts online, so I'd super appreciate if you did that. And if you're listening to this after the 10th of February, you can find the book at your local bookseller. That's all for today on Strange New Worlds. Thanks, as always, for listening. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you out there.
Fantastic. That was
that was
really good.
so
That
much
was
fun. Yeah, that was great.